Baku, of course, means a lot to Charles Leclerc. Remember 2017 when, shortly after the passing of his father, Hervé, a father figure who had been very instrumental in the early days of Charles' career and had supported him throughout. Shortly after his passing, he put his Prema GP2 car on the pole, won the feature race and almost won the sprint race. An astonishing performance given the emotional stress of that month, that week, that year. And you could, obviously, different perspective completely, but after everything that happened at Monaco, when, yeah, you could say that hitting the wall at the back end of qualifying and then not being able to start, which is what happened last year at Monaco for Charles, you could say that was entirely his fault. But this one at Monaco was a different one. He had the pole, he was leading the race, and some bad calls were made. We think they were made by Ferrari rather than Charles. That's what I understand. So he came to Baku with a mission in front of him, no doubt about that. And whenever we saw Charles on the circuit, he was absolutely on the limit all the time, even in untimed practice this morning in FP3 in Baku. And he took the pole. He needed to go out to find approximately 3/4 tenths of a second in the second run of Q3. It looked a little bit edgy. Carlos Sainz had been quickest in the first phase of Q3, and Charles again went out to do that. An absolutely millimetre perfect lap. Superb to watch, breathtaking in its accuracy. And I think the only perspective you can give it beyond that is Carlos Sainz, who'd done a really good job, as I say, in that first phase of Q3. But when it came to going a little bit further, as I've always said, when you're a relatively spiky driver and you've got slightly longer corners, it's very difficult in the closing minutes of Q3 under pressure when there's just 1 or 2 seconds to go. It's very difficult to find anything more. What is it going to be? A little bit of late braking here, a little bit of getting on the power cylinder here, and that's exactly what happened with Carlos. And as a result, he lost the back end, and that's where it went in Sector 2. Charles, however, has a very different management of the car. He's managing the dynamic weights all the time, constantly, infinitely, as Max is, as Lewis, as Lando, and probably George is, and several others. And I put those in a different category, actually, to the Carlos Sainz type driver, and that's where Charles is able to dig deeper. It's all about managing the car when it is slightly out of shape, when it is slightly wrong, and that he did to perfection. So yeah, this guy is, I don't say starting to look really good. I think he's always been really good, but for those that were doubters, even they must now be thinking, wow, this guy not only is a phenomenal racing driver under pressure, under stress, given all the politics, given the way his career has gone, but also just pole after pole after pole, really superb. And that's always a sign, of course, of greatness and the ability to win world championship. So this was a really big pole, I think, for Charles to bounce back after Monaco and take that. And with his teammate Carlos, who had been really good all weekend, looked very smooth, very polished, but only qualifying fourth in the end. So Charles got, in a way, that will be a bit of a relief for him because it will take some of the pressure, the internal politics of Ferrari slightly away from him. It's a perverse comment to make because obviously you'd imagine a Ferrari driver wouldn't want 2 Red Bulls behind him. But I think from Charles' point of view, it will give him more confidence, more ability to breathe and to do the job that he should do. Now let's move on to Red Bull, where Sergio Perez, on the back of winning Monaco and on the back of re-signing, just a surge of confidence. I suggested that maybe he would kind of go into relax mode and think, wow, done it now, and possibly back away a little bit. Not at all. Just incredible to watch throughout Baku so far on Friday and today, Saturday. I think getting the absolute best from the Red Bull car. And I think, again, we need to analyse why he's doing such a good job, relatively speaking, compared with Max Verstappen now. And I put it all down to his ability to manage the throttle, the load, the way he looks after the rear tyres, the way he's able to load the car up in a very linear way. He very rarely overstresses the back end of the car. Yeah, he hit the wall a couple of times in qualifying, Q2 and Q3, but they were brushes that he got away with, and they're very clean wall hits. They're Gilles Villeneuve type wall brushes. They weren't clunks like, I don't know, Lance Stroll. By the way, both Aston Martin drivers locking up, going straight on into the Tech Pro barrier. What was that all about? Looks like a really good car now, the Aston Martin. Such a shame that neither driver really got the best from it, although Sebastian Vettel was reasonably quick when he was on track. Anyway, getting back to the important elements of qualifying, and it was Sergio Perez's ability, I think, to manage the rear. Max saying, by contrast, on his opening lap on the new set of tyres, new set of softs, that he always felt the back end was a bit wayward. And I think that actually speaks a million words. That is Max probably being a little bit more aggressive with the power than Sergio naturally is. And if that's the case, he's going over the slip angle of the rear tyres and he's doing more damage to the rear tyres. Max then said on the next lap, okay, got some sort of balance, but then the overall grip level had gone. We saw Sergio on his second last run, I think. Oh, it was the beginning of Q3. No, it was the second phase of Q3. He's going high speed. I mean, he's got to be doing 160, 170 miles an hour, and he's doing this just warming up the tyres. And I think that gives an indication of how sensitive the fronts are to temperature and getting it exactly right. Obviously, Lewis, we'll get onto him again in a minute. Obviously, Lewis was very susceptible to that as well. And I think that is also a pointer to what is going on with Max. He does tend to drive more with the front. I mean, his lap time compared with Sergio, typically in a normal year, comes from his ability to get into the apex a little bit earlier, to manage those dynamic weights, getting in to the apex the way he does so well. But that relies, of course, on having really good optimum tyre temperatures to be able to do that. Don't have front grip, you're in big trouble. And yesterday we'd heard him talking about understeer as well. And I think, why is he getting more understeer than Sergio Perez? Probably because Sergio drives on the rear of the car. That is his feel for the car. When he's feeling the car, it's always about the rear, what he can do with the rear and the rate at which he wants to put the power onto the rear. Whereas with Max, the way he drives, it's not feeling the rear, it's feeling the loaded front all the time. And at the moment, with the way the Pirellis are, the way the Red Bull is, over the last couple of races, you got to say, it looks as if he's got a big problem with that because the fronts are so sensitive to temperature. And has he had to deal with that before? Probably yes, but he's been able to get away with it by perhaps manipulating the rear more than he can do now, because the rears are going away as well very quickly. As he said, he's losing the rear. Whereas Sergio is able to do that with the rear, and because of his incredibly good throttle technique, he's able to get the rears exactly right and then use that rear to overcome the front. So it probably sounds a bit simplistic, and I'm sure if you spoke to the engineers at Red Bull and the telemetry, none of it would add up to what I've just said. I can only express what appears to me to be going on based on talking to a lot of other engineers, talking to drivers, talking to a lot of people in Formula One in general. So that's what I think is happening there. I think Sergio really is, for the first time, his ability to look after that rear has absolutely come into its sweet spot with this specific car on these specific tyres. And I tell you what, right now, if Jenson Button was thinking of coming out of retirement, he would do really well in that Red Bull. I guarantee he would be really quick in that Red Bull as well, given the way he used to drive as well. Anyway, that's not going to happen. But it's just to give you an example of why I think that aspect of a driver's makeup is so good. So that was that. I think the other thing to point out is that Sergio could potentially have got the pole, but he didn't because they had a bit of a had a fire-up problem at the second phase of Q3. He was supposed to go out in front of Max, and in the end they had to let Max out first, which annoyed Max, which I think gives a bit of an insight into the way Max is feeling about the balance of the team at the moment. He's Max Verstappen, he's world champion, this is his team basically, and here's Sergio Perez upstaging him, not just once, not twice, but 3 times now, and that's a bit of a worry for him and his entourage. And I suppose we can talk about that now, because if you say who runs Red Bull, I think everyone would say Christian Horner, team principal. But the reality, of course, is that Helmut Marko runs Red Bull because he is Red Bull's representative. He has an incredibly single-minded approach to running the program for which he has responsibility. And his man, without any doubt at all, is Max Verstappen. And I think he and Max and Jos, Max's father, are very, very tight. And they will always want Max to be ahead of Sergio and to be the prime championship contender in the team. I think Christian is much more down the middle and would love to see proper fair racing, because he is a racer at the end of the day, between Sergio and Max. If Sergio is able to take the race to Max in a fair way. I'm not quite sure what that means, because when you've got two guys in a team racing for the championship, it very rarely turns out to be clean and fair. But anyway, that's another matter. And then, of course, you've got Dietrich Mateschitz, who owns Red Bull. Helmut Marko is his man. But I think that if it came down to it, I think Dietrich Mateschitz would go to the Christian Horner side of the fence. I think he would want to see the two Red Bull cars running alongside one another in a proper race. So potentially politics there. Let's just assume tomorrow that both Ferraris are out and Sergio Perez is ahead of Max Verstappen. So both Ferraris are out. Both Ferraris are a long way back in P3, P4, and both Red Bulls have got 15 seconds ahead of them. But Sergio Perez is ahead of Max Verstappen. What is going to happen at that point? Well, I can tell you what's going to happen. Helmut Marko and probably Joss at the back of the garage are going to be saying, "You've got to let Max pass. You've got to tell Sergio to let Max pass." And I think Christian will say, "No, it's a race. You know, Sergio's been really quick all weekend. He deserves to be where he is," assuming, you know, he does. And I think at that moment, you're going to see an interesting situation develop at Red Bull. Max himself as a racing driver, I think Max would say right now, or is saying right now, Sergio's done an incredible job. He actually outqualified me. I couldn't get the car quite right, made a few mistakes as a result. He's done a great job. If he's ahead of me on the road, it's my job to try and pass him, beat him. I'm not expecting any favours. But I don't think that's the way people around him will think. And I think that's a really interesting storm brewing now at Red Bull. Those are all the parameters. And of course, this is only one race in a full championship, and there's still a long, long way to go. It's very early days, but it could tomorrow be the first time that we really see this situation exposed. And the rather trite is not the right word, but it's the only word I can think of, the rather trite platitude of let's let the drivers race, which of course is, you know, equal performance. It's never the case, and it's never that equal, is it? I mean, they may be on slightly different strategies, different things may have come into play, and of course, Max and his team would argue that Red Bull are only as good as they are anyway, because they've been working so long now with Adrian Newey and the team, and the car's as good as it is, and therefore it's his team. So a lot to think about on that side. And the other point, of course, was that Max then was out in front of Sergio, so he couldn't benefit from any sort of potential tow. And tows are very important around Azerbaijan. As we saw in Q2, when Lewis Hamilton got a really good tow from George Russell and went like 6 kilometers quicker in a straight line and nailed it on the lap in terms of getting into Q3, because he was right on the edge. Well, he was actually out of it on his first run in Q2, and he got a great tow from George Russell. But if you look what happened in Q3, in theory, Max was going to be behind Sergio, but he wasn't. Sergio was delayed. He was behind Max, but he was a long way behind Max, so he couldn't benefit from a tow. So he did his time, almost got the pole with no tow, whereas Max was behind George Russell. And we know that the Mercedes are not very quick in a straight line. In fact, if you look at the average speeds that they were doing, typically Max Verstappen would be doing 317, 318 through the speed trap. Got to say, at the end of the straight, terminal velocity, you're looking at 338, 340 kilometers an hour, really quick in Baku. But through the speed trap, 317, and yet George Russell would be doing 310, 308, 310. So there wasn't going to be any tow coming from George Russell for Max Verstappen. Ferrari, meanwhile, in terms of the tow, Carlos Sainz was ahead of Charles Leclerc, but in the end, it was Pierre Gasly who was right in front of Charles. And that wasn't a bad thing, because the AlphaTauri is quite quick in a straight line, so that definitely helped Charles through sector 3. But Carlos Sainz, of course, messed his lap up anyway, so it was a moot point. At Mercedes, meanwhile, George Russell got a tow behind Lewis back end of Q3, whereas Lewis was behind Yuki Tsunoda, which wouldn't have pleased him too much, I don't think. Speaking of Lewis now, because he made it through to Q3, I mean, can you believe we're saying that? And it was kind of, I don't know what it is. I mean, I've made this point before, 7 times world champion. This is now 15 years since he won that first Grand Prix in Canada. And he's been racing in Formula One a long time. And to see him having to be out at the front of the queue when practice has stopped in Q1 and there's 2.5 minutes to go and he's got to be first in the pit lane to get out to see, make sure he can get through into Q2. I mean, it's actually heartbreaking, I think, to see that. And Mercedes didn't really find anything, as we predicted. They were, yeah, I mean, they're there or thereabouts. But Lewis consistently 0.2 of a slower behind George Russell, apart from when he got that tow from George. So, you know, that is something that is just feels very uncomfortable. I can't explain it. Perhaps I'm not doing a very good job of explaining it. For me, it's an uncomfortable feeling because I know, and we know, I think, I hope, how good a racing driver Lewis Hamilton is. And to see him now consistently being blown away by George, and he is being blown away 0.2 of a second in the same car consistently, is a lot. And, you know, he won't be happy about that at all. And there were moments, you know, when Lewis is, I think, is under investigation for going very slowly at the back end of Q2, and he's actually held up as a result Lando Norris and I think therefore Daniel Ricciardo and the McLarens, who were trying desperately to get through into Q3 and didn't. And he's going really slowly. And then the engineer got onto Lewis and we heard him say, Lewis, you know, you're going too slowly, remember the delta time. And Lewis said, look, I'm trying to find a gap as you told me to, and now you tell me I'm going too slowly. I don't know what you expect from me. And it was just like, you know, what am I doing here? This is all such new stuff for Lewis. And it breaks my heart, really, that that's happening. But anyway, it is, and it is what it is. The only thing I suppose you could say is if he had won the Drivers' Championship last year and he had broken Michael's record and he won 8 championships, what is happening now perhaps would be a bit more palatable. And I think what happened in Abu Dhabi is making everything that's happening now exponentially worse, race by race by race. I think that is the ultimate point. Anyway, let's just go through the final results of qualifying just so we don't miss anything. Charles Leclerc, great lap, 41.3. Where did he find that time? Just brilliant. Sergio Perez, 41.6. We know he had that delay. Potentially, he might have done a 41.4. Maybe not the pole. Max Verstappen, 41.7. Not getting quite as much out of the Red Bull as Sergio Perez. Again. Carlos Sainz, 41.8. About the limit for a reflexy car control, super cool Ronnie Peterson type driver. George Russell P5, really good lap from George, 42.7. Pierre Gasly, 42.8. 2 exceptionally good drivers of the next generation in cars that, well, they found the maximum from those 2 cars. I think it's fair to say that. Really good laps from both of them. Lewis Hamilton, 42.9. The old veteran watching the 2 hungry dogs do what they do. Yuki Tsunoda, very good job as well, I think, by Yuki to be up there 43.0 compared with Pierre Gasly's 42.8. 0.2, you know, that's the George Russell, Lewis Hamilton difference. Sebastian Vettel got the Aston Martin up to 43.0 when he wasn't P9, when he wasn't going head on into the tensor barrier. And Fernando Alonso, 43.1. Still incredibly quick in a straight line, the Alpine, but you know the overall lap, about as we said yesterday, wasn't going to be great because of the obvious downforce deficiency that they have because they're so quick in a straight line. Fernando also inducing the ire of Alex Albon at the end of Q1, who accused Fernando of going very slowly, unnecessarily slowly when Albon was following him right at the end of when they had this 2.5 minutes, and then deliberately going off down an escape road to sort of flummox Alex and ruin Alex's lap, bearing in mind Fernando was in front. But I don't know. Fernando's relatively political, but I mean, I think to be actually holding up another driver who might gazump you into Q2, I think that's saying a bit much to be on top of it to that extent, or not on top of it to that extent. Anyway, we'll see what happens there with Albon's accusations. So there we are. It was some nice things, some other nice things that happened today. Good to see Frederick Vesti win the F2 sprint race. He didn't win it just because it was a reverse grid race. Obviously, that was it, top 10. But a lot of racing going on, a lot of defense and a lot of attack. Really good drive by Frederick Vesti, I thought, in the ART car. And good to see Mick Doohan presenting the Pirelli trophy to Charles Leclerc after qualifying. Mick, just brilliant guy, and Jack Doohan, of course, doing a great job in F2 as well. Which reminds me, don't forget, to say a big thank you to Jetcraft, who have been supporting this channel for well over 12 months now, the world's biggest buyer and seller of business jets. That's Saturday. Yeah, I am going to do a live stream on Twitch tomorrow before the race, probably around 10:30, quarter to 11 UK time. It'll be a sort of test live stream, but if you want to throw some questions at me on Twitch, it's very easy to do, very user-friendly in terms of being able to ask questions. Just write them there and even respond to something I'm saying. Have a look at that tomorrow. Well, let's aim for quarter to 11 UK time, because it's quite an early start of the race tomorrow, midday UK time. So I'll be doing that on Twitch, not for too long, but just to, as I say, a bit of a test. And then, of course, we'll do the normal video after the race. Look forward to that and see you then.